Hey ERBC family, how are you doing with this whole staying at home thing? Have you adjusted to it? Are you ready to move on to whatever's next? Today I want to talk to you about what good can come out of a crisis. And I want to specifically focus on how a time of crisis can sometimes force us to do what maybe we should have been doing all along. Read through the Bible and you'll see that God often uses a crisis to grow us in ways that we might otherwise not ever grow. Romans 5 tells us that we can rejoice too when we run into problems and trials, for we know that they help us develop endurance. And endurance develops strength of character, and character strengthens our confident hope. We see a clear example of how God used a crisis in the lives of those first followers of Jesus to accomplish something that Jesus had already told them he wanted them to do. After Jesus rose on that first Easter, he spent the next 40 days with his disciples before he ascended into heaven. And one of the things he told them about his plan for them had to do with the Holy Spirit that was going to send to them. In Acts 1, we're told that he told them, "You will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you shall be my witnesses, both in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria, and even to the remotest parts of the earth." Notice, this was his plan. The Holy Spirit would come, they would receive power, and then they would be his witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea and Samaria, and even to the remotest part of the earth. That was Acts chapter 1. In Acts chapter 2, the Holy Spirit came on the day of Pentecost. That was what they'd been waiting for. Now they had the power they needed to be his witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea and Samaria, and even to the remotest part of the earth. That was Acts chapter 2. You read on further. You get to Acts 3. Where were they? In Jerusalem. You get to Acts 4. Where were they? In Jerusalem. You get to Acts 5. Where were they? In Jerusalem. I think you're seeing the picture here. Acts 6 in Jerusalem. Acts 7 in Jerusalem. Sensing a pattern? They were loving life in Jerusalem. And I think left to themselves, they would probably still be there today. Life in Jerusalem was good. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and to the breaking of bread and to prayer. They met every day from house to house and in the temple courts, and they were loving life in Jerusalem, experiencing that unity and community that was life in the early church. They were growing, but they were still all in Jerusalem. There was this commission that Jesus had given them that was yet to be fulfilled. They hadn't gone to Judea, they hadn't gone to Samaria, and they certainly hadn't gone to the remotest parts of the earth. But then when you get to Acts chapter 8, something happens. And that something that happened was a crisis. Acts 8:1 tells us that on that day, a great persecution began against the church in Jerusalem. And they were all scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria. Suddenly, finally, they were doing what they're supposed to have been doing all along. In Acts chapter 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, they're not doing what Jesus told them they were supposed to be doing. But now in Acts chapter 8, they are. Why? It took a crisis to get them to do what they should have been doing all along. Let me ask you, has that happened to you through the crisis that we're going through right now? Have there been ways that you've been able to share your faith? Ways that you've been able to pray for others? Ways that you've been able to care for your neighbors? Maybe this crisis has given you opportunities to reach out to people and say, "How can I help you? How can I pray for you?" A crisis provides opportunities for God to work through us in ways that are different than those times when everything is smooth sailing. My challenge to you is, don't miss the opportunity that God may be setting before you to do some things that maybe before the crisis you weren't doing. It's easy to look at this crisis and think about the things we've lost, the things we can't do. But I want to challenge you to think about some of the things that you started to do during this crisis that you hope to keep on doing after it's over. Ask yourself, what are some things I've started to do that I hope I'll continue to do? Among those first Christians, a crisis propelled them to do the work that God had planned for them to do. And my prayer is that this crisis will do the same thing for you and for me.